Rude. I wish there was a way, like, when you go to share it, like, I wish there was a way, like, when you go to share it, like, it would, like, you can search people. Someone added the picture where the one where I drew the picture to their favorites. I don't think it's gonna let me share it to a whole bunch of people. Are you? I just requested. Okay, hold on. Your government. It'll give it feedback? I don't know.
Well, we don't really have a way to.
We don't really have a way to test it unless we have somebody tested it for us.
Right. I'm gonna turn your camera on.
It's on. I just haven't hit it yet.
Turn it on the background.
Why? I'm not even started. Oh, okay. I didn't hit my restrictions. I wonder if there's a way I can do it from here. Hopefully it doesn't make everything glitch.
Right.
Are you new to the path? And you're
It won't let me message.
so broken heart.
It's not what I want to do.
I mean, maybe.
Hi. I'm trying to find my messages with those individuals that said that they would. Hi, Rai.
Riley! I'm kind of jealous of your fuzzy mic. Oh, we can ask Riley to test it for us. Do a sound check.
Yes.
Do you hear any feedback? Because we have both our mics on.
This way you go. My fingers are not working well. Do you want notes, Lovey?
No?
I see sorry way too much. It's my turn again. No
That's not
fuss.
what.
Mute it. There you go.
That
was aggressive.
That was aggressive. Okay, even if we don't have people in here, we're gonna keep going because YouTube. Put my cards away.
Oh, can I put my cat cards?
Yeah. going to pull a card for this episode of Whispers of the Witching Hour just to give us a little bit of guidance. I've already done all my cleansing and my smudges and our candles.
My chair gets away from me all the time because the floor is like slanted.
This card's kind of perfect. So we got the Ace of Wands, and the Ace of Wands signifies new projects, inspiration, urge to create, willpower, desire, power, potential, beginnings, and new opportunities for growth. Right behind it was the wheel. Oops, sorry, the wheel. That green screen image is for later. So the Wheel of Fortune often represents good luck, karma, life cycles, destiny, turning points, change, inevitable fate, ups and downs, and unpredictability.
I got a 9 of Wands.
Show your card.
These are cute little kitties that like to give me my tarot readings. This is the 9 of Wands. He's playing a little bit of string there. The book says, because I don't have these memorized, no matter how worn down you may already feel, it might be time for you to guard your own territory carefully. You're safe. You have a nice sturdy wall of protection around you. That said, it's not a time for complacency. It's a time for courage, persistence, and great strength. You're close to having everything you want, but remember to be on the lookout. I like that one.
I like it too. Okay, so before we jump into the content that we're going to be going over from now until Valentine's Day, some of you have seen other people's posts, some of you may have seen my posts in regards to the 13 magical nights. And when we do the 13 magical nights, the night before Yule, or December 21st, the winter solstice, you write down 13 things that you want to manifest, and then you write those individual pieces on a slip of paper, and you fold it towards you 3 times, and you put it into a jar or a container. And starting on the 21st through the 1st, you pull out 1 slip of paper each day. A lot of people do this next few steps a little bit different than how we do it. But we burn ours and save the ashes. And then when you get to the 1st, you burn your slip for the 1st. There should be 1 left.
I left it in there.
What?
I thought it was in here.
What?
My ashes.
Oh, okay. You should be left with 1 slip. That slip you can open. That's the one that you are responsible for manifesting throughout the year. And what we do, I have spell enhancer and salt, and I seal it with the protective candle. I dressed a bunch of candles. I say a bunch, 2 candles before we started our ritual, and we burned those throughout the process and burned our papers with those particular candles. And then the manifestation, can you show that on yours? Because
Yeah.
I have a green screen on mine. The manifestation that we are responsible for goes into this jar that we keep in our altar for the year as we are working towards manifesting the one goal that we're responsible for. We take the ashes from all of the slips of paper that we have burned previously, and we make black salt with them. So the salt, and black salt specifically, is made with ash and salt. It's a protective and spell enhancement. And then we'll use that. We'll use those black salt through different manifestation rituals throughout the year while we are working to manifest our responsible manifestation. So I made my black salt already. Lovey is going to make hers now.
I've saved all my ashes from my papers in this tin here. I've got Palo Santo in here. Should I cleanse it, or is it already clean?
You can. You're going to want to cleanse the container that you're going to be putting your salt into.
Which today is a cinnamon container, because that's what I have on here.
It's fitting. And then she's gonna use this super cute mortar and pestle that she got me. Oh, nope, it's still gonna pop up. Sorry, guys.
I'll show. Well, I'll show when I have it. Should clean this too.
Yeah, this is pretty cleansed, but you can.
You want to entertain while I?
I thought you were gonna be showing on camera this
Oh,
stuff.
I mean, I can. I'm just taking some Palo Santo here and using the smoke to cleanse my vessel. And then,
Do you need a piece of paper? Because you need to put your ashes in the mortar and pestle first.
yeah, that's okay. I mean, I have some, but that's what I do.
That's what I did because I would make a mess if I didn't.
Let's go this way. I'm gonna take some paper, folder there. Might be easier.
There you go.
And then pour my ashes into the paper, like a funnel. And then that's going into this mortar pestle, which is super cute. Look at that.
I got that for Christmas and I love it.
Just grind her up.
Here, put your salt in first. The salt helps grind it.
Got just regular sea salt here.
As we were burning the slips for the 13 magical nights, we would add to our slips of paper offerings of lavender or tobacco or whatever. So inevitably within your salt there are going to be those individual elements.
Interesting. There's sage.
Probably. I would leave it. It'll grind up as you're grinding it. Okay.
Now, it kind of makes me wonder, did like the American people steal New Year's resolutions from like witchcraft? Or is they always just been a thing?
I am of the mindset that everything and everybody stole everything from the witches. Not necessarily back when they were dealing with like the witchcraft trials, like the witch trials and whatnot. I feel like a lot of religious culture is heavily based in witchcraft. I posted a video on New Year's Day, right after midnight actually, in regards to a witch's New Year's. I feel like the whole witch community is split 50-50, where half of the witches would say we celebrate New Year's during Samhain. It's technically called the witch's New Year, but seasonally, the other half of the witchcraft community celebrates New Year's during the spring equinox, because it's right after we're coming out of the time of rest, and it's like growth and renewal, coming up green, the grass is growing. So New Year's resolutions with the Gregorian calendar, when you think about what people do for resolutions, they always start in January and they're like, okay, this year I'm going to do this, this, and this, where the witches, at least in my community, do that in the spring or during Samhain. So I guess it depends on the culture that you're inhabiting.
Yeah, but everyone seems to have like a new beginnings.
Yeah.
Except for Native Americans, they do reflection this time of year, which is something I put on my story the other day, that instead of instantly going into your resolutions and what you plan to fix the next year, take the time to reflect on what you did the year before, and that way you can see if there's anything you need to change, if there's anything you need to work on, but also be grateful and acknowledge the things that you did accomplish. So I feel like that's a really important thing to do at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I think when you are talking about beginnings and new starts, and whether it's the beginning of a year, the beginning of a goal, the beginning of a time period, like it's always good to have a focal point on, like, this is the start, this is where I want to end up, and then have the steps in between that essentially equate to a resolution.
Here's the grinded up salt. There's some sage in there. I feel like you can see it very well, but it is. And now I'm gonna put it back on the sheet of paper. I guess I should open that. Use your brain, Kelsey.
So as she's doing that, I'm going to give you a little overview real quick of what the next few podcast episodes are going to contain. I was on a live just before Christmas, and I had a guest on, and we were talking about spirit boards and Ouija boards and the history of them, and I kept thinking about this one particular individual that I had learned about when I was in my early 20s or something. And I couldn't remember her name, and it was really, really easy to figure out who I was talking about just by a simple Google search. And as I did the Google search on the lady, her name is Pearl Curran, I fell into an insane rabbit hole, because it wasn't just the Pearl Curran Patience Worth collective. It was literally an entire movement called the Spiritualism movement. It's classified as the Spiritualism movement of the early 1900s. I didn't realize in the beginning when I started doing my research how in-depth it was, and it's in-depth enough that I have 26 pages of notes and had to go through and like break everything down into what I thought was going to be 5 episodes, but it's actually going to end up being 6 episodes of Whispers of the Witching Hour that are going to lean pretty heavily into the Spiritualism movement of the early 1900s. So when you think about the Spiritualism movement, you hear different terms, right? You hear people say, oh, that's New Age mumbo jumbo, or that's a resurrection of the witches from the early 1500s, 1600s, what have you, before the witch trials, before the Puritanism, and the Puritans got a hold of the Catholics and then decided we were going to hang, burn, or drown all of the witches. And when you look at the temperature of society today, I think most people don't give a fuck anymore. If they classify themselves as a witch, they're kind of out about it. Their content leads you to believe that, okay, this person's into, if not witchcraft, at least one facet of it. And there's so many different facets of witchcraft that you can't really define all of them, just because there's every area of your life can have a witchcraft type classification. But it was the combination in the early 1900s, it was a combination of religious spiritualism and social activism. And in one of the episodes, we'll talk about how the spiritualism movement of the early 1900s aided in helping deal with slavery and abolish slavery laws and segregation. And it's really interesting because you don't think that what most people would classify as witchcraft is going to cover that much, but it really does. So origins and beliefs. Individuals in the early 1900s fully believed that communications with the spirits were absolutely possible. It started out as individuals trying to seek, what's the word?
Consoling?
Essentially, yeah, being consoled, but to have a finality to the death of a loved one. Closure, thank you. That was the word I was looking for. Most individuals in the early 1900s, in the beginning of the movement, didn't feel like they were qualified enough to connect with spirits, to use a Ouija board, or anything like that. So they would call on different mediums who acted as the intermediaries between the living and the dead. The afterlife, according to the mediums of the early 1900s, was like just this poppin' place. It was like a rave. There were all these people that were in the limbo area that were desperate to seek communications with their still living family members. And there were not enough mediums to help, essentially. The rise in American spiritualism first gained popularity in the States in the 1840s, so it was still before the 1900s. Did you hear that?
Was the ice maker?
Oh, not the sign on the door?
No.
It was
Well, it
loud.
might have been the sign on the door.
After it started gaining momentum in the 1840s, it moved on to other semi-American speaking countries. There was some spiritualism that spread over to Latin America, which was up to this point in time mostly Catholics. It started a lot here in the States, in New York, and then kind of spread because New York was like the entry point or the exit point for people coming in or leaving our country at that time. There wasn't a whole lot of West Coast exportation of people. It was mostly out of, New York. So that's how like it got spread from America and what the Americans believed to these other semi-English speaking countries. The problem is men felt very left out because the majority, I would say, my research says 95% of the women who claimed to or were classified as a medium or as a psychic or as a reader, they were all women. It wasn't a very male predominant field, which in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was a little weird for women to have like their own classification of work that wasn't cooking or cleaning or sewing or rearing their children. And because of this, some of the men got a little jealous and started speaking out on these women, claiming that, oh, they're frauds and that they heard people that overheard conversations of how these women were scamming people. There was a slight dip in the spiritualism movement as the clock was turning into the early 1900s from the 1840s, because the way that men were discussing, men had all the power, men were the writers, men were the ones that were publishing information, not the women. So if a man says this woman's a liar, the majority of individuals are going to be like, yep, she's a liar, and not believe her. So men took out probably a fair amount of credible individuals who could either commune with the deceased or spirit talk or had some kind of natural ability for divination.
So real quick, I turned my mic off because it was picking you up quite a bit, and I feel like it's probably echoing, and that might be one of the reasons people keep leaving.
Okay.
So I just turned my mic off. I want to let you know in case I need to speak.
Okay, you can just turn it back on then if you need.
If I need to, but it'll still echo if your mic picks me up.
Oh, I got you. Okay. In response to some of these call-outs from the male population, women kind of grew together and created organizations that were for women, by women, to lend a little bit of credibility to what it was they were practicing. So modern practices, while the movement and popularity waned in the early 20th century up until current, spiritualism has continued to be practiced in the United States and in various countries, even across various denominations. So when you think about individuals who practice witchcraft, there still are Christian witches. There are still individuals who believe in witchcraft that are Catholic.
Are all Christians witches?
You would think. I don't think a lot of Christians would appreciate hearing that. Specifically, the Catholics or the Catholic Church probably wouldn't be too happy to know that the majority of what they do is witchcraft. They preach from an altar. They cleanse their space with herbs, smoking herbs at the beginning of each of their services. They preach from a pulpit that's an altar. I think I already said that. But when you think about Catholicism and Christianity, their basis for their religion is built around God creating the world and all these seemingly really magical events that happened early on in the Bible, and then you bring in Jesus, and the three wise men were led by stars to the manger to give this magical baby
Incense and myrrh.
that, like, it's all there.
Yeah.
It's all there. I don't think they appreciate that, but I don't think the Catholics really approve of being called out on anything, because that's questioning the franchise, I guess. I have a hard time calling it it's a spiritual belief. I understand that people seek solace in their spirituality. So just as some might call me a crackpot because I believe in witchcraft and magic and the ability for individuals to connect with the divine through metaphysical means, whether it be crystals or meditation or magical rituals dealing with gods and goddesses. I believe that, so I should also be able to say that I believe this other thing. I think the problem with individuals in my pantheon is that it's fine that you have your own belief system, but call it what it is. It is witchcraft. It is spiritualism that is commercialized, essentially.
Well, and I don't have any problems with religion itself. I have problems with individuals who use religion as a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I draw the line right there.
Yeah, and I think from the beginning, all different practices of spiritualism, religion, whatever you want to label it, has been weaponized to some degree. Mm-hmm. Even witchcraft. Witchcraft has been weaponized by a lot of individuals. Like, you don't get your way, okay, I'm going to hex you. Well, there's power in that. If you believe it to be true, your intentions is setting this thing to happen to somebody else, that's weaponizing your magic. Mm-hmm. Like, call it what it is and be real with yourself and everybody else when you are claiming or doing these things, you know?
Yeah.
So what brought us to all of this was this will you hold the drawer shut, because the planchette is super tiny. I got this super tiny little Ouija board.
So cute.
From, like, I don't know, Temu, or you want to show how little the planchette is?
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know.
It's tiny. Like, it's smaller than your fingernail tiny.
And you're not supposed to look through it. I was about to look through it.
Yeah, don't look through it.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Put it on my white shirt. There we go.
Yeah.
That's tiny.
So I wouldn't say that it is a usable spirit board, but it got me to thinking, and I've done a lot of research since then, and since that last podcast where I was talking about the history of the Ouija board. And some people would have you believe that the Ouija board was created by a game company and then sold as a game to kids. While that did happen, that's not where the Ouija board started. In fact, in ancient China, in 1100 AD, during the Song Dynasty, there was a method called planchette writing, and it's called Fuji.
My bad. I thought you already changed it.
It just gave you a restriction. It's okay. I already had my restriction.
Oh, I didn't though.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I got called out.
You sure did. So historically, that's the earliest documented that we have of a Ouija board or anything like that, and is 1100 AD, and that's where we get the name for the thing that is used with the Ouija board. It's called planchette writing, so the little device is called a planchette. Mm-hmm. In the late 19th century, the spiritualism movement gained popularity in the United States, and people believed that the dead could communicate with the living via spirit boards that were used in seances, or other mediumship means for communication.
Now, early communications, I'm sure this is probably covered in your points, but was it mostly valid, or were there a lot of, like, fakers out there? Because I feel like a lot of con people, the second they heard about this board that could talk to the dead, they were like, ooh, I can use that.
So I do have some talking points on that later on, but I have no problem touching on it now because it's valid. the numbers are about 70% of it was just straight bullshit. Just random people who made their own spirit board at home with parchment and wax and letters and numbers. And
Because it takes two to move the planchette.
Correct.
So.
But 30% of them, their information that were given through communications. I should probably move the glue from the heat.
Yeah, that's.
So about 30% of them, the information that they should have had no prior knowledge on. They shouldn't have known specific events or details of this deceased individual's life. And the only other person that knew about these particular things was the individual that went to the medium to get the information. So about 30-70 is where the split was.
How long did it take for it to get demonic?
Probably relatively quickly.
Yeah.
There are a couple instances that we will talk about later, but between now and those episodes, if you want to know about some of the crazier stuff, just look up the Fox sisters, Fox sisters. And for the one sister, some of it is like, there's no way that wasn't real. But for the other sister, it's almost like
She was jealous.
she was jealous of the older sister that was having these weird things happen, so she emulated the other sister,
Right.
but in a ridiculous fashion. So, yeah, it's crazy.
Sisters be extra.
Yes. So the first commercial use of the Ouija board, the first one that was patented, was in 1891 by an individual named Elijah Bond, and the name Ouija was reportedly given by the board itself when medium Helen Peters asked it what its name was. So that one hasn't been debunked yet, so that would lead one to believe that this individual, Helen Peters, was an actual medium that was discussing with somebody. So the idea with the spirit board is it's a living individual connecting to a deceased individual. So for her to claim that it wasn't a person that she was talking to, it was the board itself, and the board named itself, like, was it the board that named itself, or was it somebody on the other side, maybe somebody from the Song Dynasty from the original 1100 AD boards that's like, this is what it's called. And translation between Asian cultures and and English have not been great. So the Chinese name for the board was Fuji, Fuji.
Mm-hmm.
So if an individual was trying to spell from an Asian language to an American language, phonetically, it would be Ouija. So
Interesting.
how did this board name itself through this medium if the medium wasn't talking to an actual spirit, but the board itself? That's not really ever been answered. Just assumed that, and in none of my research or notes did I find where somebody questioned, okay, but wait a minute, you're telling me this is how this board works.
You're telling me this inanimate object is a thing, is like a living
A
entity?
sentient thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Maybe not, I don't know.
What, did anyone ask a second board? Maybe they all have separate names.
That's a good question. I don't know. So that's when Elijah Bond patented the first board in 1891. So we're talking 130 years ago that this particular thing has been patented within the United States.
Was it patented for monetary reasons or so that they wouldn't get in the wrong hands?
Well, so it doesn't say what.
That just seems like a weird thing to patent for me. Like that would be like patenting. Are dowel rods patented?
I don't know.
Like that's just weird to me.
Well, so if you have a creation, you make something, you create something, and you patent it, that means you own I think it's like, there can be copies, quote unquote copies, so long as they're like, 20% different than what the original is. And if you look back through history at what the boards actually look like, each iteration is significantly different than the one previous. So whether he patented it for monetary reasons is irrelevant, because the next board that was created off of the idea of spirit boards was so significantly different than the one he patented, he couldn't really sue them for copyright or whatever.
I mean, you can patent an idea, but he probably didn't. I don't know. I feel like patenting a spiritual device, that would be like patenting the Bible.
Right? Right?
Like,
But no, that's actually a really good question, and I'm going to write that down because now I want to know. There are things that I want to know that I didn't think of in my research, and that's definitely one of them.
this is why you invite me onto your podcast,
Yes.
because I ask questions.
Is this why you didn't want to look at the notes beforehand? That's kind of cool. I appreciate the assist. So, moving on from like the 19th century American version and then the board being patented versus the start of spiritualism, you talk about popularity and evolution. And I understand why. I think we talked about this when I was doing my research. The Ouija board blew up in popularity during World War I, where mothers and fathers were hysterical because during World War I and during World War II, we didn't have the sibling laws for our military like we do now. The sibling laws for our military currently is if you have 2 sons and both of your sons are in the military and son A dies, son B is getting an honorary discharge and is going home. It gives me chills thinking about it because I have family in the military.
Yeah.
Back then they didn't, so mothers and fathers were sending their kids off to war for World War I, which was terrible, as was World War II, and losing both of their kids in these wars. So then a medium, whether it was a real medium or a fake medium is irrelevant, would go and wait outside the telegraph office and write down addresses for these telegraphs to be delivered so that they would know when this family lost a loved one, and they would, in the research it said they'd give them a couple mourning days and then knock on their door and be like, hey, listen, I have this device and I can speak to spirits and I think your son is trying to get a hold of you, because they knew that their son died because they were at the telegraph office, and would very much take advantage of, I guess would be a better word, of these families who were dealing with insurmountable tragic loss of like entire bloodlines because all of their children died during the war.
Kind of on that same subject, are there any like famous cases of arrests being made for individuals that did take advantage of people?
So when we get into some of the historical figures, there are a few that were being looked at, but I would say the majority of them evaded arrest because they
Claimed that they
dropped it and then they moved. And then like,
oh yeah, because most of them fake names, fake personalities, fake
just
everything.
not real.
Yeah.
And there are, it's really interesting when you think about like some of, I don't think I have it right here. The historical individuals, presidents even, that had seance rooms in the White House because they thought that the spirit world had ties to political magic or what have you, and having a seance to speak to these ghosts essentially would help them with their political career. Obviously,
Making decisions, that's kind of scary to think about.
yeah, like some of our early laws could be because some crackpot medium who wasn't a real medium, and when I say that, I believe in mediumship, I believe in divination, I do divination myself, but I'm also not aiding a politician on writing laws for our country based off of what my cards are telling me. That's insane.
Yeah. And there's no telling that the person that's in the White House or whatever is a valid medium anyways. So, like, they could just have an opinion about something and, like, present this elaborate seance that just depicts their own opinion on what should be done.
Right.
That's scary.
Yes. So the other 2 things that I have written under the category of popularity and evolution, the first one being a cultural impact. So the spiritualism movement is very, very heavily influenced in our current modern day entertainment, movies, books, basically in horror films, a lot of the visuals you see are based off of not current iterations of like the spirit boards, but earlier iterations of the spirit board. And then one of the, which is the whole point of today's podcast, one of the biggest things, and it was the one that I was talking about the other day, is this woman named Pearl Curran. She created a spirit board in her basement using leftover supplies that her husband didn't need anymore, and she used mineral oil to seal it. And like in the whole time she was creating this thing, she was grieving the loss of her only child, who ended up, they don't give a whole lot of information on the child that died, just that she was grieving the loss of this child. And she wanted to create this board to hopefully speak to her son. And this is where it gets really weird, and it's so intriguing to me. There's so much information out there, you can find it. So if you type in Pearl Curran in your Google search, you're going to come up with something that says Patience Worth.
Drop it down just a little. There you go.
Can you see now?
Yeah.
So Pearl Curran up here, and it pops up Patience Worth. And then it has all these information on her and her different books that she's written. But the crazy thing is Pearl Curran and Patience Worth are not the same person. Patience Worth is not an individual who is created in the psychosis of this woman's brain that came about because she was mourning the loss of her child. Patience Worth was an actual individual who was alive, and historically you can go and find all of her information. Supposedly she died on the same day that Pearl Curran's child died. So in communicating with Patience, Pearl communicating with Patience is all the P's that are getting me.
Yeah.
They just started having this back and forth conversation, and it, through the course of their friendship, they end up writing many books. And if you know how a Ouija board works, it's letter by letter. And sometimes it's slow going. So if you wanted to write a book, and you could only write your book literally one letter at a time, not one word, not one sentence, not one page, it's one letter at a time, because the spirit is over here talking to you and feeding you this information. Like that's how Pearl Curran wrote her books. So some of the back history of Pearl Curran. She was born in 1883 and she died in 1937. Sorry, I need water.
Here, while you take a drink, I think I should get a Ouija board to help me with my art.
Do mediumship art.
Yeah.
That is an intriguing idea.
It would be fun.
Yeah.
Or even like poems.
Mhm.
Or, I don't know.
Business ideas for Space Cat Designs.
Yeah.
So, Pearl Curran was born in 1883 and she died in 1937, so she wasn't old. She is classified as an American housewife from St. Louis who became famous in the early 20th century for her involvement with a Ouija board and the spirit she claimed to channel named Patience Worth. She was born in Mound City, Illinois. She moved to Texas when she was young, and I don't know if I want my history to be classified this way, but her history is classified as relatively unremarkable. Like, I don't know, I think talking to ghosts and publishing 4 books, this is pretty remarkable. I don't know. So she married John Howard Curran when she was 24, and they lived a really comfortable middle-class life. Her first contact with Pearl was in 1913. Her friend Emily Grant Hutchinson's is the one that discussed the Ouija board with Pearl in dealing with her grief of losing her child, and her friend was like, hey, so there's this thing that can help you communicate with the dead, so maybe if you made one, you can speak to your child. Like, just that little bit of a whisper was enough for her to
Do the thing.
So between 1913, when she first made her first spirit board, for 20 years until she died, it took 20 years, 2 decades, of Pearl channeling Patience Worth to produce these several novels, poetry, prose, Patience is right, and then this is in the information. It switches from talking about Pearl as the author to Patience as the author. Pearl never claimed that she was the one that wrote these books. She always gave credit to the individual who she assumed she was channeling, named Patience Worth. So she never even took credit for writing these books or taking the time to get these books written and published.
Everyone just assumed that she was giving them a pen name, like.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is when it talks about her education, the scholars of the time were just astonished that this woman who had a very limited education, she's lucky that she could spell very basic words, is now putting out these full-length books of highly intelligent.
Well, to be fair, scientifically, that's not far off from possible. So I can see why people would assume that because of some kind of psychological break, she'd suddenly be able to have these abilities. But
And you say the trauma of losing her only child was the break enough to.
Yeah, but I mean, if I don't know, because you said that she died, her kid was gone the same day as Patience. So unless she somehow knew that, then there's no way that connection would be made just because of psychosis. It would have to be a psychic connection.
Yeah, because in 1917, you might have had obituaries in the newspaper. I don't think they would be like what they are today. But Patience was supposedly somebody that died on the West Coast.
Yeah, so
and she lived in Indiana at the time.
So she would know.
So how would she have come to that knowledge if it wasn't some kind of actual connection to this particular spirit board? And maybe her grief is the thing that drew Patience in, and somehow this spirit, we don't know what the afterlife is like, right? So maybe her son was like, hey, I need you to go help my mom because I can't do it.
Right? Or it may have been completely unrelated. She could have just saw this grieving mother and was like, I need to fulfill my destiny. Maybe I can do that by helping aid this woman who's grieving.
Right. So when it became well known that Pearl was communicating with Patience and was writing these books, she actually became a national celebrity later on in those 2 decades where she was writing for Patience.
Right.
And she was earning so much money because she was traveling around the entire country giving demonstrations of her channeling sessions with Patience, and she would channel and then she would write the word down, and then she would channel some more and she'd write the word down. And she would do these in like huge auditoriums with paying audiences. So her husband was like, hey, that means I don't have to work. Cool, you know?
Yeah.
So they just traveled, and she would do these mediumship readings for Patience. And it's kind of cool.
So Patience got to be famous.
Mm-hmm.
And she got to kind of distract herself from the grieving of her child.
That's Pearl.
Huh?
Pearl,
I know.
yes.
Patience got to be famous.
Yes, and
through Pearl.
Yes, and Pearl got the break from
the
loss of the child. So currently, all of the books, except for one.
I can't stop yawning. I'm sorry.
All of the books except one are penned as Patience Worth as the author, not Pearl Curran. So although Patience Worth's works are not widely known today, they were highly regarded in their time. A lot of socialites and women of the times looked for poetry and prose that they can read.
Is that what it mostly was, or did she write novels too?
She wrote novels too.
Like, what was the theme? Like, what was her genre, I guess?
Sadness.
So dramas?
Essentially, yeah.
Tragedies?
Yes. Some of those poems that she wrote are still currently being published in like larger anthologies of early 19th century literature. It's completely fascinating. So Pearl ended up dying in 1937, and her obituary was in the St. Louis Globe Democrat. Famous headlines: Patience Worth is dead. Not Pearl Curran.
Wow.
Yeah. So I per the article that I was reading, they were highlighting the significant role that spirit played in Pearl Curran's life, so much so that Pearl Curran didn't even get like a subtitle in her own obituary. It was Patience Worth, because this person, the only living person that had the ability to channel Patience Worth, was Pearl. So symbolically, Patience Worth died again. Her information, her stories, and all of that.
But then Pearl didn't give her goodbye. Like,
No,
that's kind of messed up, man.
it's really sad. Like, can you imagine being famous for writing a story, and there's like this one particular character of your story, and then when you die, they don't even name you, they name the character. Like,
Well, that's kind of like being, like, let's say I was Beyonce's assistant, and throughout Beyonce's life, throughout my life, all I did was assist Beyonce. And then when I died, everyone was like, oh, well, goodbye, Beyonce. That's so messed up.
yeah. So the next section, we'll go over Pearl and Patience collectively and the work that they did. So the four main books, so none of the poetry, none of the proses were actually compiled in an anthology of all of their work. Those were just submitted to like newspapers and such that were published episodically. But they do have four books that you can still find today. The fact that we can find them 106 years later, 107 years later is crazy to me.
Yeah.
So the first one is called Hope, True Blood. That was published in 1918. The second one is The Sorry Tale, which was published in 1917. The third one is called Telka, an Idol of Medieval England, 1917. And that one was more of a history of medieval England, which is crazy, because I think that particular book solidifies the fact that it wasn't Pearl making up this information. It was this very metaphysical information that was coming through Patience, because Pearl had never, up to that point, never been outside of Illinois or Indiana.
Right.
They didn't talk about medieval England in the very minimal education that she had. So unless she was like sneaking away to do research at a library, which she couldn't because she couldn't get a library card because she was a female, how would she have access to this information?
Yeah, that's kind of incredible, actually. If this story came out today, with the internet available and everything like that, everyone would be like, okay, this is a hoax.
Right.
This lady's crazy.
Hi,
She's
Mandy.
trying to fool us all. But back then, they didn't have internet. Like you said, women couldn't get library cards. There wasn't a whole... You had to travel to know things.
Right.
And because we just didn't have this information highway that we have today.
Right.
So it gives that much more validity to the story.
It does. The last book that I could find that was penned under Patience Worth is called The Pot Upon the Wheel, and there was no real context for what the book was about. There's no publication date. So some people say that that book was published posthumously after Pearl died, so there wouldn't be a lot of that information. But again, all of these books were claimed to be channeled by Patience Worth through Pearl Curran using a spirit board, which...
This sounds like it would take a long time.
Yeah, so I often comment on your typing speed.
Yeah.
I think it's just fascinating. Some people can type really fast. But again, you are channeling entire books, individual letter by individual letter.
Yeah.
I am curious as to how long that would take.
Well, and what conversation had to take place for Pearl to even be willing to do this for Patience? Like, what was the initial bond that they had? Is there any record of that?
I don't know, but that is another question that I'm going to...
Because, I mean, if someone walked up to me and was like, hey, I need you to write a book, but I'm only going to tell you one letter at a time, I would look at them and be like, nah, you're crazy. Like, bye.
Right? But on the flip side of that, who says Pearl wasn't the one to
offer.
propose this idea to patients.
But that's what I'm saying, is there had to be an initial relationship. Like,
Yeah.
she had to know that Patience wanted to write. And Patience had to know, like we were talking about, that she was grieving enough to want a distraction from her real life. And so it brings me to believe that basically Patience helped Pearl. I don't know how to put it, but like not just distract herself, but Patience helped Pearl get famous. So maybe that was her dream, was to be recognized for something,
Right.
even though she didn't have these skills.
Right.
And then Patience was able to provide that for her. I don't know. I'm really intrigued by this story.
So as one might assume, the reactions to Pearl saying, "Hey, I'm penning this manuscript," from a ghost through a spirit board were varied, like significantly. There were. Sorry, guys. It's time to take my meds. Says the crazy lady talking about a ghost writing a book for. So the believers, and there were a lot of believers.
Hey, Kristen.
Hi, Kristen. Sorry I didn't see you. Like I said, there were enough believers for her to be able to tour the United States and sell out auditoriums worth of people that either were skeptic and wanted to see it happen, or were full-on believers and just wanted to take part in it. With the individuals who would go to her shows that would pay for a seat in these auditoriums, they saw Pearl's experience as genuine communication with the spirit world, and majority of the individuals, when they were leaving, would praise her work and her ethics and her calmness and her patience, and no pun intended, and her ability to do this seemingly really personal thing. Why? Why?
What did it do?
Oh, hold on,
Get
guys.
restricted?
No. Inactivity.
She's
I'm
got
still
to do the slidey thing.
Okay, hold on. Let me say hi. Okay. All right. I was not inactive. I was actively speaking. That's so weird. Okay. Anyways, majority of these people believed that she was doing what she claimed to be doing. So there was a very heavy positive reaction from society all across the United States, not just West Coast, East Coast, where you have a little bit more liberal living. Even in the Bible Belt in Indiana, people were receptive of her skills, ability, her claims. Like, there wasn't a whole lot of like, "Oh my God, you're a witch. Why are you doing this?" Like,
well, if as long as you don't preamble yourself as a witch, Christians can tend to take the abilities like that as God-given talent. So I can understand that.
yeah. So the fun, like, not fun, the interesting side of this is, let's get into the science of it, because there was some skepticism involved, and there were many psychologists and skeptics attributed the communication from Pearl's subconscious mind rather than an actual spirit connection. Like, she somehow had that mental break when her child died, and it was kind of like you said, like something snapped in her brain, and she now all of a sudden had these abilities. But because she didn't want to come off crazy, like, the best thing that she could do is say, "Hey, you know those boards that everybody are using right now? I'm talking to a ghost through this board, and that's how I have this information." Because you got to remember, the book that she wrote on the medieval times of England, like, she had no previous knowledge of that information.
She wasn't educated in
Right.
medieval.
So that's kind of where the hiccup is with the psychologists that were skeptics, because, you know, there's individuals who have head injuries. They fall, they hit their head, and
they
they
can
wake up.
suddenly speak French.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. But those individuals also probably had heard French subtitles or something, had some kind of encounter with that particular thing. Whether they knew it or not was irrelevant, because the injury itself brought up all this
Give them eidetic
information.
memory or something.
Yeah. Whereas she never had the exposure to some of the stuff that she was writing about. So how can that be subconscious information unless there was some kind of spiritual connection or divine connection or what have you. There were some members of the public. Hi, Zen. You say hi. You won't let me wave. Sorry. Some members of the public, obviously, you're not going to have 100% of your community believing you when you say, hey, listen, I am talking to a spirit through this divination board and we're writing books. Like, people are going to look at you like, what the hell did you just say to me? So there's bound to be skeptics, right? There was a lot of people that believed because they were able to see, but a lot of people also didn't believe. What's wrong?
I'm just playing with my mod kit. I didn't realize I had one.
Yes, because you are one of my mods.
Right.
So some of these individuals that were skeptic were individuals of her own community, right? People that knew her, knew that she went through this trauma, and viewed her claims as pretty inherent suspicious behavior, believing that she might be fabricating these stories for attention or fabricating it because it is so wild and out there that it's something that she could monetize, is the word that we would use. Because she did. She ended up monetizing it. She ended up traveling all across the United States and hosting shows in auditoriums that sold out nightly to show her using the spirit board to write these books. A lot of people were curious. There were more people that were curious and intrigued by the phenomena that she was claiming was happening, and they would attend her seances and her readings just to witness the supposed mediumship, spirit communications firsthand. She was, as one would imagine, publicly ostracized by certain religious groups. And it didn't specify in my research whether it was Catholic, Christian,
Muslim,
nothing.
Protestant.
There was no information that said it was this particular religious group that basically called her a crackpot. But there were some that weren't public with their criticisms. Like, they would show up at her house and be like, hey, I am scared by what you're doing because you don't know what you're inviting into your home, into our neighborhood. There's children that live around here. Some of these religious organizations believed in
the demonic aspect of the Ouija board?
Yeah, and believed that a person could be inhabited by a spirit and then start doing all these horrible things to people.
Can I rewind for just a second?
Yes.
So, hear me out. What if it was like pagans that were like, okay, this bitch is crazy? Like, think about it, because if they were used to actual magic, and then all of a sudden this person's famous writing books claiming that they're talking to the dead through a board, like, I feel like the witches might think she's crazy.
So, I mean, again, it doesn't say which religious...
I'm just saying it's a possibility.
No,
that
it is.
It isn't Christians or one of those groups. It might be.
Well, wait, if you, we're going to jump ahead here for a second. If you look at the modern temperature of the paganism, witchcraft, Norse, whatever pantheon that would potentially be classified as witchcraft, or at least in that umbrella term, there are a lot of individuals who are like, oh, that's my cultures. You can't use that. It's a closed practice. You know, so who's to say that wasn't the case back then, that these people are like,
Get out of my...
I don't know who this bitch is, and now she's doing what we do, and she's doing it and making money, so no, you can't do that. That's for us, not for you.
Yeah.
So,
I can see that happening.
It's absolutely possible. So, overall, wrapping it up here a little, overall, Pearl Curran's experience with Patience Worth generated a wealth of information, a lot of, I don't want to use the term scientific evidence. People studied her. People would go to her seances or to her mediumship things that she was doing in these auditoriums. And there were scientists and psychologists and doctors and religious individuals, as well as the people that like just jumped on board. There were people that were studying her, and that created like this tornadic movement of mixed beliefs, skepticism, curiosity. Yeah, so that's like, in a nutshell, like one of the most crazy things to come out of the spiritualism movement in the early 1900s. And there's a lot. In future episodes between now and Valentine's Day, we'll talk about some very well-known political individuals who had partaken in the spiritualism movement privately, but publicly they were Catholic or Christian and preached their politics from a Christian standpoint.
One thing I don't think that we've covered, before we cut this, can you define the spiritual movement?
Yeah, so the spiritualism movement in the early 1900s started essentially in the 1840s and went up to technically World War II. And it was anything that could be classified outside of Abrahamic religions. So
just becoming more popular, like,
Mhm.
because it existed before.
Correct.
It just was hush hush. So
Yeah. So in the 1500s and the 1600s, you think about the Puritan movement, right? And the Puritans are the ones that, at least here in the States, because it was in England as well, it was in European countries, it wasn't just here in the States that we had issues with the witch trials in the 1600s. And here in the States, a lot of that came from the Puritans. Well, the Puritans, if they are still a practicing belief, they're way underground, nobody sees them, nobody talks about it. It might just be modified into other modern day religions, but because of the witch trials and the deep hands from the Puritans that were in that, like, everybody just kind of stepped back. So there is essentially 200 years worth of time between the witch trials and the start of the spiritualism movement. I think the witch trials scared the shit out of everybody.
yeah, rightfully so. God.
And you were on either side of it, right? So you were pearl clutching Catholic that was like, no, witches are bad. But then you were on the other side, the spiritualism side of it is most of the time those people weren't even practicing witches. They were healers. They were people that would make medicine out of herbs. They were midwives.
Or just old women that people didn't like because they creeped them out. Like,
Yeah.
It just, that's where we get a lot of the imagery for witches now, isn't it? It's the old lady with the long fingernails and the hunchback, and that really had nothing to do with witchcraft. She just got labeled as a witch because nobody liked her.
Right. Yeah, for sure. And like, again,
Can you
so
take it down?
loud.
Can you guys hear that?
I think probably with the mic they can't because it does so good at filtering. But where we live, we have a really pretty sign that's hanging on our front door, and it's so windy here. The sign keeps banging on the door. It sounds like somebody's like kicking our front door. So back to your question, because I think that's the defining what the spiritualism movement is. It's like a collective of puzzle pieces. So you had witch trial era, late 1600s, this 200-year gap where people were terrified to say that they believed in it or what have you.
Accused of believing in it.
For sure.
Yeah.
The crazy thing is we can see that 200-year gap, and then we do our research on the spiritualism movement of the 1900s and see about 1840 is kind of when it came back. It dropped off just a little after World War II because people were really focusing on the Holocaust and the Dust Bowl, and just everybody had horrible things going on in their life that people weren't really paying attention to that until you get to 70s hippie era, and then the 80s
When everyone was cool with everything because
Yeah.
they were all high.
But if you want to go back the opposite direction in time, Leonardo da Vinci was absolutely a freaking witch.
What was Nikola Tesla?
Nikola Tesla would also have to, I would say he'd be a science witch.
Yeah.
Chemistry and alchemy and all of those things to create. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing about Leonardo da Vinci, yes, he was an artist. Everybody knows his art. That's not debated. He wasn't just an artist, though. If you think about the Vitruvian Man, that was created because he wanted to be the person to create the first human wearable flying device. And he would make all of these crazy contraptions that they could use in their militaries or that they can use for entertainment and all of that. And
what about the drawing, the man?
That's the Vitruvian Man.
Is it?
Yes. But then you have Da Vinci's quatrains. And if you know what that is, you absolutely need to follow me right now and tag me and tell me that you know what that is so that I can follow you back. Because the quatrains is what people in modern day read and look at to determine, like, it's a book of, oh God, foretelling of what's going to happen in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And the crazy thing is when the attack on the Twin Towers was known because it's written in the quatrains. Like he was a seer, he was a knower. The Catholic Church, hypocrites that they are, would go to him and say, hey, we need you to make us this thing, or we need to know information about this thing. And they would use him to gain information, but then if he was caught helping other people do the same thing, the Catholic Church is like, I'm going to kill you because that's blasphemy. That's against everything that we do. So again, it doesn't matter which direction you go in the timeline, there is witchcraft, again, an umbrella statement, everywhere. There might be dormant areas. Think of those 200 years between the Salem witch trials and the early 1900s. And then that little bit of time after World War II up until, like I said, 50s, 60s, hippie era. And then now, and I don't think it's going anywhere. Like, I think
No, I think it's snowballed so big now that it may even become the majority in our near future.
So the crazy thing is so we've mentioned Catholicism, we've mentioned Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, sorry. There are over 3,000 recognized religions and spiritual beliefs. I'm not saying my spiritual practice is 100% accurate. I'm not saying that I'm wrong, but I'm also saying I don't know it all.
Yeah.
And I think the same thing is true of every other 2,999 religions. I bet you there's some truth to that.
Hit or miss.
But I bet you there's some...
Yeah. Yeah, no, well, I've always said that if you take all religion and spiritual practices in the world, there are similarities across the board. So what if the similarities across the board are the things we actually got right? And then the differences are the things that maybe aren't quite factual, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, guys, that's all we have for you today. Today was mostly the episode of Pearl Curran and Patience Worth. I would encourage you to do some research on your own because there's a lot of information out there, and I'm trying to keep our episodes down to about an hour. We've been for an hour and a half now because it's so interesting to me. But there is so much more information out there on the spiritualism movement of the early 1900s that we're going to get into, and Patience and Pearl's story is just a very small snippet of it. So do your research, and we look forward to seeing you next weekend on the second episode of this particular series.
Hold on, don't end it yet. I would like to propose an ending for our podcast to you. Can we draw an oracle card at the end of each podcast?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
You want to do one of yours, or you want to do mine?
We can take turns. I'll grab mine.
That's so fitting. We started this episode of the podcast with a card pull, and we ended up doing two because the Wheel of Fortune card is so fascinating to me. It just
It just keeps popping up. Isn't that crazy? Every time we've brought out the cards, the Wheel of Fortune has came up.
I know. So, want to reiterate a little bit what she just said. We pull cards on a regular basis, and I would say probably since right before Christmas, almost every time either of us pull cards, different decks every time. I thought you were going to say it was the World card.
Oh, no.
Every time we pull to do like a full spread, we get the Wheel of Fortune card or the World card. It's so crazy to me. All right, Levy, what you got?
We've got play.
Okay. Like with a Ouija board?
That's interesting. So, it came with a book, which I love. I love the ones that come with books because I'm not super good at remembering things. I have ADHD, so
You're an ADHDer though. Like that makes it even worse.
yeah, it's terrible. It's hard for me to learn anything. But when I find things that I'm super interested in, I learn it really, really quick, and I will remember it for the rest of my life. But for some reason, whenever I try to study something, it just doesn't stick. So I love these books. I've got it pulled up to play. Hindus refer to the creation of the universe not as the work of God, but as the play of God. In our own creation of our lives, we can get so caught up in checklists and traffic jams that we forget to have fun and to dance with life. Engaging in play, whether that's singing in the shower or doing improv comedy, means that you are in the here and now. You are co-creating with the universe. Allow your heart to find the beat of life and remember to play. And there's always a quote at the end. Life is a great big canvas. Throw all the paint you can at it. Danny Kaye.
Ironic, she just ordered a large canvas to paint a painting for me that I requested. Talk about playing with the Ouija board.
Yeah.
That card was spot on.
Yeah, it's a
I
good
love
card.
it. I love it. So, finally, the last thing I really want to talk about, and I will post this on our website, and I will put a notice on our YouTube channel. I'm thinking that I am going to switch our live recordings of the podcast to Saturdays. I work a lot from home, running River Blues a Year and a Day school program online. There's a lot of things that involves curriculum, lectures, newsletters, content.
This woman stays busy.
Yeah. And I work a full-time job outside of my home. So rushing through an entire week and finally getting off on Friday knowing I don't have my job outside of the home Friday and jumping right into a podcast, I think it's unfair to you as my viewers to throw really awesome series and really awesome information at you when I'm exhausted. I think it would be a little more beneficial, more of a relaxed atmosphere if we moved it to either Saturday or Sunday.
I think we should play around with the time, though, because it doesn't seem like a lot of people are active around 7. So
Right.
we may have to do it a little later on Saturdays. 8 or 9, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll play around with it, but I think from moving forward from here, we're not going to be doing the podcast lives on Friday. I need to be able to take time to rest and recover after a busy week.
Right. Well, and it's on days that you work, I like when we get to actually spend time together, not on camera. So I think that it would work better for us to, when we've had all day together, be able to come together and do this thing instead of on a day when you're gone all day.
Right. And I think it's super fun. So I do all the research for these podcasts, and I'm pretty diligent with my notes. I go through my notes. It helps me formulate the time of the particular podcast. The fact that you don't want to look at the information, that you're coming at it from an organic angle and coming up with some really awesome questions that I didn't think of during my research. It's giving me a loop around to go back and look up that information because now I want to know. So
We help each other learn.
we do. But thank you guys, and we will see you next Saturday. Have a good night.